Before we start on that, I would remind you that no names are to be mentioned.
Fair enough. Thank you. The title of the agenda item with Charlottesville wasn't part of the request, so that's a bit of a surprise. But my intent was to start a discussion on what happened, the findings of fact from what happened, to inform us so that we can discuss potential policies for sidelines for curriculum so that it stays on the field. So I guess I would ask Mr. Ritchie to talk about what the findings of fact were.
So I'm happy to do so. First of all, the agenda item was posted as a Charlottesville instructional unit because that's what it was. It was an instructional unit of approximately 2.5 to 3 days about the events that occurred in Charlottesville. You're aware that you were in receipt of a letter from Senator Morgan advising you that she had received calls from or contacts from parents who were outraged that a video called "Trump and the Power of Whiteness" was shown. I don't know who those parents were because they were not referred to me or to the principal. So I don't know, I'm not sure how many or who. So when the letter was received, I spoke to Principal Zenyan and Assistant Principal Florenz, and we certainly looked into the matter and determined that the letter from Senator Morgan contained a number of inaccurate statements. So first of all, let me tell you the process we used. Greg and Mary Beth spoke to the teacher, looked at the lesson plans for the day. I met with the teacher also, with her representative and with Greg and Mary Beth. And I also asked Mr. Zenyan to conduct a focus group with about 25% of the students in the classroom. So that was all done before I reached any conclusions. The letter alleges that English and social studies should not be integrated, and that's clearly not our direction. We actually have a humanities teacher, humanities specialist that works for us, that works to integrate those two subject areas because there's natural integration between the two. So that's clear. There was an allegation in the letter that the teacher compared the Trump presidency to the Holocaust. That did not happen. There was no comparison of the video to the Holocaust. Not one student made that connection. Even if it wasn't spoken, not one student made that connection in the focus group that was conducted. There was an allegation that being a Trump supporter was evidence of being a white supremacist, and that was not discussed in the class, and not one student made that connection, even if it wasn't discussed. So I think that letters like this can be quite inflammatory, and I would have preferred that if there were complaints that they'd be referred to the principal so that the principal could respond, or even better, to the teacher at the lowest level. We did receive 2 other concerns that did come to the principal. One was around the showing of the video, and Greg spoke to the parent, and the parent seemed quite satisfied with the explanation. Another concern came through the chair of the school committee about a comment a student made after the showing of the video. Greg reached out to the parent, and the parent wanted to know further action. So whether those 2 parents were the ones that went to the senator or not, I don't know. So we may have actually spoken to those parents, but I don't know that we did. Mrs. Yor also made an inquiry and spoke to the principal. The principal responded, I believe, to Mrs. Yor's satisfaction. So those are the facts as I know them. I don't believe there was any ill intent. I don't think there was any of the allegations in the letter are actually grounded in fact, and the best evidence I have of that is the conversation with the students, because they are the recipients of the information in the teaching. So with that said, I want to offer some personal views on this, if you don't mind. I don't want our teachers to be afraid to teach about controversial things. I think it's It does our students an injustice at a time when we are trying to make our curriculum as relevant as possible. So I think it would be a mistake to put barriers up so that controversial issues cannot be taught. On the other hand, when a teacher or anyone chooses to go down that road of teaching a controversial issue, there is a need for probably a greater attempt to plan and deliver in a very sensitive manner. I think there's a correlation between the degree of controversy and the amount of planning that has to go into that kind of a lesson, because it's very sensitive. And you know, with impressionable young people, we have probably a greater responsibility to be careful and to be, you know, extra skilled in the delivery of that subject matter. So, so those are kind of my thoughts about what occurred. I don't want to at all start screening teacher resources. I think teachers can make those decisions on their own, and that's kind of where we are today.
Clay?
I agree we don't want to put undue burdens on our teachers. I'm not sure how a reasonable person could say that this video was appropriate in an English class. Did everyone on this committee see the video?
I did.
So I mean, is that a video we're comfortable playing here?
So that's I didn't quite say that. So I think there was a question of age appropriateness for the video, and I think there were things that could have been done to show the video to a group of 8th grade students that would have made it appropriate. I wouldn't have shown the video to a high school class with no support. I think the video is, if nothing, controversial, and could lead itself to some very, very rich discussion, depending on what the prompts were. I expressed concern about the language, which was a little bit offensive. But again, if couched properly and in a skilled manner, even that could have been delivered in an appropriate way. So I think it's all about what the planning looks like and what the delivery and what the scaffolding looks like. So it's not as easy as saying that is appropriate or that's not appropriate. A lot depends on what kind of support we put around it.
Donna?
Totally agree with you. I believe that it was very courageous of this teacher to address and use the content that was so controversial that it stimulated the thinking in the children. I think that we need to do more of that, and I believe that the teacher was very courageous to do that. I believe that it is not easy. There are many teachers that would not touch this with a 10-foot pole, but the spokesperson on the video is a gentleman that has incredible awards, and I read his books, and I think he's an expert on the subject, and who better to speak about prejudice and racism than a person of that caliber. So I really, when I saw what was going on from the letter from Senator Morgan, I thought, wow, here's a teacher that really is stepping up to the plate to help our kids look at the situations that we're dealing with today in a lot of, from a lot of different perspectives. We must expose our children to diverse thinking. I believe that the teacher did not, have faith in the teacher that she did not try to sway the children one way or another, but if we avoid these kinds of topics in the classroom, we are going to not raise our children to be the kind of thinkers that we hope will be standing up for a better democracy in the future. Anyway, that's my feeling anyway. I commend the teacher for doing it, and I actually, and I think I said this to you before the meeting started, I think Mr. Ritchie handled it in an extremely appropriate way. Anyway, you know, when Clay says that it was not appropriate, To me, it was not as controversial as watching the nightly news, because you watch the nightly news, and that is where controversy comes in. So to bring it into the classroom, to get the kids starting to think and debate about these issues, I think is extremely important. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Georgia?
Does the superintendent think it was appropriate or not appropriate for the 8th grade class? Or does the principal, or what were your findings? Is it or isn't it appropriate as far as the school is concerned?
So as I said earlier, appropriateness is determined by the way in which the subject matter is presented. I think there could have been additional supports put around the showing of this video that would have made it appropriate. And without those supports, I would have question about its appropriateness.
Catherine?
I watched the video. I read an article that accompanied it. It was challenging. It made me uncomfortable. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I don't think it's fair on one hand how people want to call this particular generation snowflakes and say that they can't put up with any adversity or learn how to deal with challenges if we don't present them with any challenges. So I think it was a very, I'm sure it was a challenging piece. Excuse me. I don't know if the teacher would have thought differently about it. In retrospect, it's not necessarily appropriate for me as a school committee member to contact that particular teacher, but I am confident that the superintendent and the principal and the vice principal did their due diligence. And I would be very cautious about putting strictures on teaching. You know, I think we also have to remember that these are not metahumans that are in our classroom. These are actual human beings, and they deserve the opportunity to have a second thought about a lesson that they might present. So I appreciate the work that was done by the superintendent and the principal, and I think we can move forward. Thank you.
Alania?
We know in the planning of this particular video, was there another video planned or another discussion planned for the opposite view of what this, I mean, I don't know the teacher's plan, okay? And I was wondering, is there another view of what she was saying? So, and like you always say, you have to have two sides.
Yeah, so I think that there was another video shown. It was a PBS video. It was a recording of a newscast, right, Greg? That was about the Charlottesville incident. So there was another video shown. And I want to go back to the statement I made earlier. Like for me, the measure of whether it's appropriate or not is really determined in the way it is determined by the way in which it's presented.
Could I ask you if one of these two parents is not the parent who made the initial call or whatever, because I don't know who they are, now hears us today, because I think the title of this particular agenda item may not have expressed what we were going to be discussing, because I don't know if many people knew that Charlottesville was the initial plan for this teacher. Okay.
It was the instructional unit. It was a unit on Charlottesville.
From what I was reading, you know, from the letters and stuff, I didn't
maybe a little misleading.
I didn't get that impression, right. So I don't think maybe the parent is the one who had said this to Senator Morgan.
I don't know that.
We don't know.
Right.
So if they came to you today, you certainly would be willing to speak with them to satisfy them of what you have, what conclusion you've come to.
So when a parent comes to me about an event that occurs in the classroom, my first reaction is typically, have you spoken to the teacher?
Right.
So that's where I would ask the parent to start the conversation. And if in that conversation the parent is not satisfied, I would then say, have you spoken to the principal? And if I get two no's, like I would say that's where you need to be. Not that I would deny someone the opportunity to speak to them, but I think that's where you get the best information, is because I got my best information from talking to the teacher. Absolutely. And from talking to the principal. So that's where I would refer them. But if they didn't want to go there, I would never deny someone the opportunity to talk about it. So absolutely.
I guess the parent may not have known, you know, what his recourse or her recourse was. Who do I go to
Well,
first, you know,
yeah,
so.
as I say to you all the time, because I know, and I'll say this publicly, you get complaints at times about things that occur in the schools, and you know, largely it's a person's perception about what occurred, and I always say to you, you know, the best recourse is to refer them to the closest person to the event, and let them work up the chain until they get satisfaction. And if they don't get satisfaction, they should absolutely come to you
Yeah,
and say,
'cause
you know, we're not satisfied.
I myself would have been more comfortable hearing the words of the parent to, you know, in other words, things are mixed up here, subject-wise, like Holocaust and Charlottesville. I wonder what the parent really said.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
okay, so I would.
And maybe I do know. Maybe one of those parents that did call us is one of the
Correct.
I just don't know.
Correct. Okay, thank you. I was just concerned about the parent, and maybe we should make parents more aware of the chain
Mhm.
of event.
I think, excuse me, I think most parents know, but I will repeat it. There is a chain of command. There's always a chain of command in any business. You don't go to the owner of the company before you go to your supervisor. So in the school department, you have a complaint, you go to the teacher. If you need to, go to the principal. If you need to, go to the superintendent. I myself had a call, and what I asked, instead of answering any of her complaints or questions, I said, you know, I'm not an administrator from the school, I'm on the school committee. You need, first of all, to talk either to the teacher or to the principal. And I think when someone calls a school committee member, we need to give them the chain of command, because they're going to get their best answers, like Barry said, to the person closest to the situation. I also think when you're teaching the Holocaust, because it is a controversial issue, and some people think we made the whole thing up and it didn't happen, I think you have to teach about prejudice. And so I think teaching the prejudice in the Holocaust in that class, maybe that was not the best video to show the prejudice, but it certainly did point out prejudice. But I think it was appropriate to talk about prejudice if you're going to talk about the Holocaust. And the Holocaust was very real, and so is prejudice. So, Murat.
First thing I want to say that I understand what Mr. Richard did, and I appreciate the work that you've done to kind of talk to the teacher and talk to parents, whoever decided to talk to you about the subject. I do have, however, have a problem with kind of merging the English language class with this particular kind of video. I personally don't see them fit well together. If there would be a political discussion class, which is, you know, I will agree with things that were said here, that we should raise our new generation being able to discuss and debate politically charged subjects. I just don't see this being a really wise choice on the side of the teacher to present to the class in the scope of Holocaust in general and English lesson in particular, English class in particular. So I know it has been said by you, Mr. Richard, that you don't see, you know, trying to filter the content that the teachers use in their curriculum, and I understand that this is probably a difficult task from all kinds of perspectives, so I agree with that. But that said, I believe it is important that we put some guidelines, and I believe we discussed that last time, as to general kind of scope of the material that teachers do use, and I expect them to fully continue to use external sources in their teaching of the students. I think it is important to remember that always two views on every single subject, at least two views. So I think it may get, if we don't, as a school committee, follow up on this and let this be as it is, it may have some really bad consequences, because, you know, we have this example of one particular video, and we all interpret it as it appears in different way. Some were satisfied, some were not. And a lot of people probably were somewhere in between. who can guarantee us that our children will not be exposed to some other radical video tomorrow that may come from a different charge, or different, or the same maybe, we don't know. So that's my concern. I do understand that teachers have to be making wise choices. Unfortunately, in this particular case, I don't see that being made, in my opinion. That's why I'm asking that the school comes up with at least a general policy. It could be very short. I'm not trying to say school has to define in a hard, stone written way the sources that teachers can use, not at all. But there has to be some general guideline as to if there's a political issue that's being presented, teacher has to be making some wise choices. So that's all.
Yeah, may I respond? So I want to emphasize again that this unit of instruction was not about the Holocaust. There is a Holocaust unit of instruction that merges English and social studies. This was not it. It does happen, though. I want to be clear about that. So as I was going through this process, I am in agreement with you that the biggest challenges are around the political issues. And I think that while you have some policy about how to handle politically charged content, it is not as coherent as I would like. And I've actually drafted some broad language that you may want to consider in the future, but I wanted to see first how this discussion went tonight before I presented it to you. So at a future meeting, I will have something for you. I'd like to run it by Vin also, get his perspective on it before I bring it to you. But I think there is some room for improvement from a policy perspective, especially around politically charged content that could be controversial.
Donna?
I just want to be very clear that we are, first of all, from what I understand, it was about the unit on Charlottesville. And I believe that the video that I saw was extremely appropriate for Charlottesville in light of what was happening at the time. When Marat spoke about the video, he called it a radical video. I don't see it as radical. And I would hope that whatever decisions we make for policy changes do not in any way touch upon censorship of what our teachers can do, okay? Because, you know, we're not talking about burning books or destroying videos or any of that stuff, so we have to be very careful and trust that the teachers will always use appropriate videos in a way that is appropriate to the lessons that they're teaching.
Ron?
I am familiar with this gentleman, Ta-Nehisi Coates. I've read his material. I've seen the video. The video is provocative. There's no question about that. And I think Barry is skillfully and correctly talked about context. You can't introduce things of this nature without context. And I think the way in which the focus group was handled without knowing what happened, I think the feedback that we got, at least to some degree in my mind, satisfied concerns that I would have had about how the students react. We live in very, very, very emotionally charged times. The advent of social media has had a profound impact on the way we get information, the way we internalize the information, the way we react to information. Racism, among one of many, many issues in this country today, are so publicly out there, it is difficult to get your head around a lot of this stuff. We live in a state that is virtually white. It's predominantly white. Our student population reflects that demographic. That's not a pejorative comment that I'm making, it's a fact. Words that were used in the video, words that Mr. Coates has used to describe the plight of blackness, African American history in this country, it can be controversial and provocative. In part that it's a painful ordeal that he has experienced firsthand. It is something he tried to share in terms of his rage and, you know, the way in which his race is handled. Having said that, I would be very cautious about the words that we use in terms of kind of couch defense of what we do or not do around censorship. We have to rely on the skillfulness of the teachers, their moral and ethical responsibilities, integrity, not to censor by any stretch, but to be very careful. And I appreciate, Barry, that we do need more guidelines around that. I would hope that department chairs, administration get together and talk about some of the parameters around these things, because anybody dealing with issues today could bring something very, very upsetting, if you will, to students or even to adults, as we have seen. That we need some guidance in this area, but I am very cautious about First Amendment rights, what teachers can and cannot do, and we must be careful and guard that right by demonstrating that we can bring balance to controversial issues in our schools.
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with you that balance is key, and I've said to Greg and Mary Beth, it's like threading a needle, that when you make the decision to show something like this and to engage in this conversation, that you have to be really careful about balance and perspective, and make sure that the supports are in place, especially with younger kids.
Just, if I might, just to close with that, I think this was maybe an era of omission, not an era of commission. If she had done what I think you suggested, Barry, we may have had more of that balance in. So I don't think there was any intentional way of castigating Mr. Trump or even this whole issue around race, but I think she may have missed some steps along the way, and I'm comfortable with the way in which she handled it. Thank you.
Murat, did you have something?
Yes, I generally agree with what Donna said from her position and what Ron said. However, as I said, this particular type of content may be seen as completely innocent by some and a completely radical and almost criminal by others. And that's my concern. I do agree with Ron that teachers have to exercise a wisdom in providing this. So if this video would have been framed as something that is an opinion of certain individual, and that you and any other individual, be it a student or their parent, may or may not agree with this or completely disagree, I think that would make it a lot more passable in a way, maybe a lot less controversial in the fact that it appeared on the educational material. But from what I understand from these letters, it was not. So that's my concern. It was presented to kids who in 8th grade probably are much more prone to be influenced by an adult, especially the one being their teacher. That's my concern. If it's within the discussion or presenting somebody's point of view that you may or may not disagree with, and that's clearly expressed, that's one thing. If this is being taught, that's a completely other thing from my point of view. That's all.
Catherine?
We've established that Senator Morgan's letter was rife with inaccuracies. So I'm a little apprehensive to say, I don't know what this teacher taught. I wasn't there, none of us were there, and that's not necessarily our purview. I don't know if you want to speak to that just a little bit. I don't know. I want to be respectful of the process and of the teacher, certainly. So I don't know if you can clear up some of that. I mean, I understand Murat's broader point, and I think it's a good one. You can't let anybody show anything that they want. But I don't know that that's necessarily the case in this particular lesson. And I don't think Senator Morgan presented in the letter to us, which is the first thing that we had heard about it, necessarily what was accurate.
Yes, so I think you have to be really careful about making judgments, as I do, without really getting deeply into it. So I described the process that we went through collectively to kind of get to the meat of it. And without having access to that information, I don't know how people could make judgments that they did. So you're right, I don't know if those exact words were used. And I want to also make clear that the video was shown to one class, not to the entire unit, to the entire 8th grade. And the teacher made a decision not to show it to others because she found that there wasn't the time necessary to provide those supports that I described earlier. So there was a judgment, a good judgment, I think, made after the initial showing of it, not to continue because of the lack of time to provide those supports that I had described. But I would just caution you to not jump to the conclusion that, you know, everything was awful.
Greg?
Gary, I appreciate everything that was done by you and all the administrators and the teachers. Going forward on this issue, one thing we haven't mentioned here is the kids. From my observations, I think the kids nowadays are fantastic. They're still kids, but I think we should show a little more faith in their capacity to understand, their capacity to think. These kids nowadays have more empathy than my generation ever did. So let's show some faith in them. Thank you.
Lisa, do you have your hand up? Okay. Melania, one more thing.
As far as Senator Morgan's letter, I'm first finding out that there are some differences of what had happened. However, I believe she took what a parent was telling to her. And so apparently, no, we don't know.
I don't know that.
I don't know it either. So I was just wondering if she was taken into the consideration of determination. To me, you did what you should be doing as far as administrative-wise. But I think that the first parent, the second, whatever parent went to her, possibly before anything was made, or maybe we can still speak to that parent, because this is the conclusion a parent came to.
So again, I don't know that, and if a parent wants to speak to us, we're happy to.
Right.
I requested that in my letter to her. Like, I'm happy to speak to the parent. Greg is happy to speak to the parent.
that-
Mary Beth is happy to do it.
That's why I had
And
asked.
we may have already.
Right,
I just don't know.
right. No, but I meant, I think that when she wrote, and I don't know, when she wrote this, she didn't just make up Holocaust or whatever. She had to get that from somewhere. And
Right.
maybe this parent's child, everybody seems to be confused.
Well, that's why I'm suggesting that the better way to handle these kinds of things, and again, I'll repeat what I said to you earlier, that even when complaints come to you, is to refer them back to the lowest level. And then you don't get into the guessing game about what really transpired, because I can't answer that.
We know it. We know, I mean, we've learned what the stages are and who to go to and whatnot. But the parent, I guess, a child comes home and says something to a parent gets all rifled up.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, well, where am I going to go to? I don't know who to go to. Apparently, a parent spoke to Georgia, and, you know, she told him what to do. But apparently this parent went and spoke to other people. Yes, she did say at the beginning that, I think Mr. Ritchie said that, Georgia, spoke to the parent, did you not?
What I
And he was
said that
satisfied.
Mrs. York contacted, I don't know if I said this or not, but I'll repeat it anyway, contacted Donna, and Donna referred her to Greg, and she spoke to Greg, and Greg responded back to her after we investigated.
Right.
So that's
Okay,
fine.
that's where,
Yeah.
that's where I just heard that now. But the thing is I don't know, I think, now that I think if a parent watches this, or many parents who are watching this, will know the chain of command, and it will be the better for it.
Lisa? Okay. Ma'am?
Robin Norrie in Nashaway. I was just wondering if during the course of the controversial, politically charged, highly debatable subject matter that does come up in schools and has forever, are the parents in any way made aware of subject matter that might come up at the dinner table that night?
So not typically. We don't usually preview content in advance of teaching it, with the exception of sexuality issues in the health curriculum, which we do notify parents of annually.
Well, as Ron had said, we live in very highly charged political, emotional, and societal times. Perhaps that's something that should be at least discussed. I know that if one of my children had come home and tried to describe that particular video to me, I would have gone right through the roof, not knowing if there was any balance on the other side. Why was this being taught in an English class? Excuse me, Marat had raised that issue. Maybe a little forewarning for the parents is something that would help to obviate the need for letters and phone calls and people scratching their heads as to what happened and how did it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ron?
Mr. Ritchie, did Senator Morgan reach out to you either for phone or, I mean, the letter was directed to the school committee, not, I never saw a copy to you. My question is, did she call you, to Melania's question about he said, she said, did she call you and ask you for an explanation?
No.
Well, that was unfortunate. I think if she was relying on what she had heard, it would have been for her as well as for all the parents, and I think it's consistent with what you're advising all of us to do, is to make personal contact to get information so that the accuracy of what is being presented, and particularly in a letter, and for knowledge as to what went on by making that contact. So that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that.
I think most of this controversy that went around had the parents who called, or parent, how many, if they had been told there is a procedure to go through, then it would not have been necessary to write us a letter and leave the superintendent out. I don't know of anyone, a parent, who feels that if something happens in a classroom, the first thing they need to do is go to their senator, and the next thing they need is go to the school committee. I just feel that parents know you have access to the people in the school who have the answers. The senator does not have an answer to what happens in a classroom.
So I want to make it clear that I don't know if I have spoken to that. I don't know if we have spoken to that parent. That parent may have called the principal. I just don't know that. Because we did receive, was it 2 calls, Greg?
I received 2 emails and 1 call. One was a concern around our curriculum. I explained where you could find the curriculum and what you can do to look into the curriculum, and that ended that issue. One was about something related to this with a discipline issue, that the parent made it very clear they did not want me to take any further actions, so I didn't. And then one was on a parent who, after their child came home and talked about the video, viewed the video with them, and emailed me saying how they thought it was very timely and appropriate for 8th grade students and that the material could be handled. And furthermore, when we do our one-to-one rollout, I stand up in front of every parent and tell them, before you give your child your computer, before you allow it in the house, you should ask for their password, and you should go on that computer as the student, and that gives you access to everything, to every single Google Classroom, to every single playlist, to everything that they're seeing in class. So every parent in the middle school has been advised to look at their student's work as if they're a student by going on as their student. And they can see every playlist and every video and every article and everything that's put up on the board every single day. So we are very transparent. And the English teachers in the middle school, most of them have been there longer than me, and I feel they do an outstanding job. So if you're gonna not want a little controversy, you're gonna have a lot more discipline issues, because it's gonna get really boring. I mean, these are 8th graders. They need to be excited about coming to class. They need to be engaged. And, you know, this is what they're viewing on TV, and this is what engages them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Craig?
Back up, please. What is this preparing these kids for? What are they doing this late winter, early spring?
So, you know, because you've been to D.C. So I've gone on the Washington, D.C. trip with our 8th graders 8 times. I would challenge all school committee members to come and chaperone it. I will also tell you, in the 9 times I've gone, I walk through the Holocaust Museum by myself every time, and I try to sit back and take in how our students act. I will tell you, the most students we had go through is 225, I believe, and the least is about 160, 180. I will also tell you that I've never seen a Chariho student wear a baseball hat. I've never seen one be disrespectful. I've never seen one raise their voice. I will tell you in walking through, I've seen students from other schools sit there and talk about how the Holocaust did not take place and this is all phony. I've seen discussions that, in my opinion, are, not how I believe our 8th grade students should be talking. So I will tell you, when I walk through the Holocaust Museum, I am extremely proud to be the principal of the middle school, and I'm extremely proud that our 8th graders not only, have a feeling for what is happening in that museum, but they've been well educated and they've read material that has prepared them to fully understand, to the best that an 8th grader can, what took place during World War II. So if you have not been to the Holocaust Museum, it's a little bit hard to really explain what they go through, but if you have a sense of how eerie and somber and difficult it is. But I think in the 9 years I've gone on a DC trip, I believe we've had one student that I'm aware of not walk through it. So they're well prepared, they understand why they're there, and they've been well educated on it. And I would challenge anyone that says we should not be teaching night in an English class. And that is, if that's not social studies in English, humanities, whatever you want to call it, that is what we do in English. Long before I've been there, I think it's extremely successful. I think our English teachers have a huge command of what they're doing with that, and then they connect it with our social studies teachers. I think good teaching in an ELA or social studies class, it's hard to tell what they're teaching. Just like if you walk into a good science class, you may see math, and you may not really know, am I in a math class or a science class? There should be some integration of subjects in a middle school. We are not specialized enough that we should just be teaching in isolation.
Thank you. Melania, one more shot.
I'm now confused. We said this had nothing to do with the Holocaust, and yet Mr. Denyon speaks when Greg asked the question, how is this teaching, or told about the Holocaust Museum. So
I said earlier
sorry, I'm
that
confused.
this instructional unit in which this President Trump video was shown was a unit on Charlottesville. I also said to you that in 8th grade there is a unit on the Holocaust.
But the controversy was about
But the
video.
unit of instruction that in which this video was shown was a unit of instruction about Charlottesville.
Maybe that's what confused the
Possibly.
parent.
Yeah, possibly.
Anyone else before we go on? You're up. One more shot.
I'll make it quick. I know Mr. Zien for probably 9 years or so, so have deep respect for all the work that's done. And I do understand the context, and I don't believe anyone in this room will be even partially a Holocaust denier. That's not what the discussion is about. I just, again, this has been a politically, in my opinion, and I know Donna disagreed with me, politically charged video. I believe in every single class, if something like this is being presented to students as a challenging material, there has to be a balance. Or there has to be some thinking about how students may perceive this. I did encourage, when I taught for some time in the after-school math program, I always encouraged 15 minutes of free topic discussion to all my students. And we went all over the board. And I always been saying, be respectful, always know there's another side. And that's all I'm asking for, such that the teacher, while exercising their right to provide challenging material to students, always consider there are always two sides to one story. That's all.
Anyone else? Can we move on?